many of you have heard of Pope John Paul II's Theology of the Body? How many of you have heard of it before? Okay, almost everybody. Have you ever read anything of it or attended any presentations on it? How many of you read or attended presentations? Okay. Oh,
A little bit.
Little bit. Okay. So what I intend to do tonight is to kind of give an introduction to his overall perspective of the redemption of desire. And most of the material that I'm presenting is from the first part of his book, in Theology of the Body. And then he goes on to go obviously into more detail in it, and I'm going to briefly talk about some of those aspects later as well in the talk. So for those of you who don't know, since some of you didn't raise your hand, the Theology of the Body was a series of 129 Wednesday papal audiences that John Paul II gave between September 1979 and November of 1984. Now, this was a culmination of... Come on in. Welcome. Excuse me, this was a culmination of decades of reflection, of thinking, of research in the area of anthropology, of humanity, of sexuality, and theology and philosophy. And he had intended to release the Theology of the Body as a standalone book, but then he became Pope, and so he felt like the best way to disseminate the information was through the series of Wednesday audiences. And he also had previously published a book in the late 1950s called Love and Responsibility, which he drew upon that material to go deeper and more into in the theology of the body. So that it just didn't come out of nowhere. This was a culmination of kind of his life's work up to this point. And the perspective is through the lens of marriage and the one flesh union of the spouses in that sacrament. The Pope says we rediscover the meaning of the whole of existence and the whole meaning of life. So that's a pretty bold claim, to rediscover everything through this perspective of marriage and sexuality. So if you really think about it, the theology of the body is the study of God within our bodies. And our whole faith hinges on the incarnation, God becoming flesh. And without that, we cannot be saved, we cannot be redeemed from sin, we can never go to heaven. And so the idea that the perspective that he approaches this is because a proper theology of the body provides the key to understanding the whole body of theology. So if we understand how our physical nature through the incarnation fits into the body of theology, then we understand all of theology through this lens. So he gave us an entirely new perspective of which to look at our faith and our theology. And so it kind of answered, his point was to answer life's two most fundamental questions. What does it mean to be human? And how do I live my life in a way that will bring true happiness? Now, the study of who we are as human persons is anthropology. So John Paul II calls his answer to that an adequate anthropology, because there's many other anthropologies out there that were inadequate and being proposed for hundreds of years since the Enlightenment. And we're going to look at one of those later tonight, called the Descartes, or his theory of understanding humanity. And then how do I live my life in a way that will bring true happiness? There's a lot of answers to that our world offers as well. Do we look for happiness in our work? Do we look for happiness in money? Do we look for happiness in possessions, in a relationship, in sex, in drugs? Do we look for happiness in our life here on earth? A lot of people would say yes. Okay? But John Paul II would say no. Our ultimate happiness exists, as we all know, in God alone.